All right, I guess we are live. I'm just going to go. So I see participants coming in. So I'll just wait for them to come on the chat. So welcome all of you, those who are joining us today. So just go ahead and let me know in the chat window. Let us know in the chat window. So we have a session today on really the whole application bit, and I have Keerthana with me today, who will be sharing some insights about her experience and her journey. So why don't we just get started? Please go ahead to the chat window. You should be able to see the chat window, and yeah, so you can just go ahead and let us know. Hello, everyone. So just some housekeeping, some ground rules before we get started. So the first thing is, any questions? I would love for you to go ahead and let me know. Why don't you let us know which city you're joining us from? Yeah. So we can just tell Apurva from Haridwar, right? Holy City, Akshay Mumbai, Vikas Pune, Puneet Mumbai, Rourkela, Sanjog from Bhubaneswar, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Kolkata, Patna, Hyderabad, Delhi. So all over the country. So excellent. Bangalore, Hyderabad, great. So I'm joining you guys from Bangalore. My name is Arun, and we will be having a session. We'll be having a chit chat today. So I want to keep it a little different. We're just going to, try to discuss. The idea is not that we are experts over here or we have got it all figured out and we are going to tell you whether you should do something or not. But consider this more to be a discussion between, two people. So one of them is someone who's actually where many of you aspire to be, and also get her view on how things have been. And I will also be giving my insights because I've got the opportunity to work with a lot of students through CrackVerbal. So just a moment of introduction about CrackVerbal. So in case anyone who's a student, you can let us know. But we are into GMAT test prep, and we are into application services as well. And the story is that, Keerthana was a student at some point, but welcome, Keerthana. First of all, I would like to welcome you. Thank you so much for taking out your time and chatting with us. So,
thank you so much.
Yeah, so I will let you basically get started with your journey. So if you could just tell us a little bit about your background, what has been your journey like, and how you went about your application process, and specifically if you could touch upon what attracted you to applying to US. Why was that a destination for you? What were the considerations you had? So if you could just throw some light on that.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for inviting me here today, first of all, and then thank you so much for joining all of you. I'll start with my background. I'm yet another computer science engineer. I worked in the IT industry for about 4 years, and then I co-founded a food tech startup based out of Hyderabad. Ran it for about 2 to 3 years, and then I decided to do my MBA. About the MBA application process itself, I had initially thought of doing it back in 2013 when I was just about 1 year out of my undergrad, and I had by then realized that I wanted to do an MBA because I enjoyed the process of managing something. I was working on a product, and I enjoyed more than developing a product. I enjoyed the process of interacting with the customer more, creating an impact with the design that I do or the managerial decisions that were being taken on it. So that's why I chose to go down that path. And back then I was waitlisted by one school thrice, and then I let it go. I decided that I probably needed to gain more experience, and then I reapplied in 2018. So that's when I think I took the services of CrackVerbal. I had chosen to take their essay writing services, basically. So how I went about doing the process itself is, first thing, as usual, you would do your research. So I had a list of the schools that I wanted to target, did extensive research by going through all the blogs online, all the blogs. I did talk to a lot of people. I had few friends who were doing their MBA at that time in the US. I had few friends who had already done their MBA. I reached out to current students in a few schools. I talked to them extensively to just be able to shortlist my schools. And one crucial thing that had happened at the same time was that I was crunched for time. By the time I decided to do my MBA, round one applications were over almost in all the schools, and I was hard pressed for time even for round two. I had like 10 days for the schools that I was looking at. And that's when I think CV really helped me too. And then the next step was obviously the interviews, and I had gotten calls from 4 schools, and I really wanted to do them in person because I thought that would give me, a door to someone in the school that I'd never interacted with before. And that's what I chose to do with Kelley. The other 3 schools, unfortunately, gave me only Skype interviews, but those are also good. And finally, when it came to deciding which school I wanted to go to, I had at Kelley I had a half tuition scholarship and a guarantee. I mean, I had a admit, and the other option that I had was McCombs, and I was again waitlisted there. And hard pressed for time, I had to choose Kelley, and I couldn't really wait for McCombs, and that's how I ended up at Kelley. And if you ask me why US, well, I had both personal and professional reasons, I would say. Personal, because my sister was already here. She had come about 2 years earlier to me, and she'd done her MS. I knew how from her perspective and from a few other perspectives, I knew how the market here worked. I knew that I could come here and work work towards getting a job here. That was the personal front. And on the professional front, I had a number of reasons. I had compared the job market both in the Europe versus job market in the US, and I thought that this was a much better job market, especially for MBA students. And I also saw the ranking of schools, and I figured that most of the top schools were in the US, and some of them were in the target list that I had. So it became easier for me to decide that it was US. I really didn't think of doing a MBA back in India at that time. I really wanted to do it outside. So
Great. So I think interesting. So I'm just making some points. So I just wanted to kind of dig a little deeper. You mentioned about scholarship. So I think that's one thing that weighs a lot on people's mind, right? Like the whole ROI and the whole this. So if I were to understand what was a scholarship like, did you have to apply for it separately? How much was it, and how did it help? Just a little bit more on that.
sure. Okay, so I'll answer the question of whether I had to apply for it separately. No, I didn't have to. Uh, I also, so when you apply for some schools, they ask if you want financial aid, you can choose that. But if for Kelley, I particularly didn't do any of that. They uh, directly gave me the scholarship, and Kelley also has full tuition, half tuition. Um, that's about it. They usually till about 2 years back. I mean, till our batch, they also had a GA, which almost amounted to a half tuition scholarship. But now they are not doing that going forward. They are just opening up GA to everyone and giving scholarships separately. And the amount would be for half tuition. It was around $50,000 for both years.
Great.
And that's a huge amount because it covers a lot of the tuition. It becomes easier for you to also for your living expenses as well.
Correct. And if I were to ask in terms of if you were to take the scholarship, then what would be the tuition fees and how much would it work out in dollars? Because a lot of times I think what happens when people think of application, in their mind, this number is, 1 crore, I need 1.5 crores, that's the number. And that frightens a lot of people to even make the decision. So how much did it work out in?
I completely get that. I was frightened myself. And so yes, so how did I make that decision is early on I decided that I would take a loan, and none of the banks were giving me in India back then were giving me without a collateral, a loan without a collateral. So I decided to go with Prodigy Finance. A lot of students would have heard about it, and they give you loans based on your GMAT, a whole of other factors. They give you a good ARP, and that's what actually put my mind at ease because I knew that I had something that would definitely give me a loan, how much ever the amount it was, without a collateral. So having said that, if I just think about the loan that I have now, that I've accumulated over the last 2 years, it is a huge amount, but uh, it it comes to around 60 to 70, even with my scholarship, 60 to 70 lakhs that I'm saying. And that's because not only do you have to pay your tuition, but also you have to think about your living expenses, the rent, the utilities, and you also have to think about, as an MBA you're going to have expenses in terms of travel. You're going to have to go visit companies. You're going to have to go visit people that you want to network with, and all of these put together. It's not going to be a lot of amount, but then just combining everything. So with that in mind, I took a slightly bigger loan than I should have probably. And if you think about the loan that you're going to accrue, you can also think about the salaries that you're going to get post MBA. And I'm telling you, it's not going to be that difficult to pay it off in, let's say, 4 to 5 years, even if you have plans of saving or doing something else in the US.
Right, right. And that kind of also I wanted to ask about how was the job scene being like for you, and how has been the experience? If you can just also tell when you went from India. I think one thing that we keep telling our students is don't expect that companies will come like day zero, day one for placements. That's one of the things. So what's been your experience like?
Okay, I think I have two things before I even talk about my job
Sure.
experience. I want to tell two things about recruiting that I think applies to international students and especially to Indians. One is the recruiting journey for every international student, even if they are in the same school, like all international students in the same school, is going to be very different. It's going to be vastly different. It's a very individual journey. And that's because you have your own individual experiences, your past, your past pre-MBA journey, that is, and then what are the individual's goals? It depends a lot on that, how much they're willing to compromise when they are in the recruiting journey. And what I mean by compromise, right? Like if you would have come into the journey, to the MBA program saying, uh, I want to get into consulting. But then if an opportunity opens up in product management, are you willing to take it? Because sometimes it is a game of, okay, it's okay, even if my dream job is in consulting, I need to get this job because I'm an international student. So things like this. So it's going to be very different. And I can give you more examples. Just in my batch of Indian students, in my uh, like my peers, a lot of us, some of us got our jobs pretty early on, or our internships early on. Some of us got it in the middle of the school year, and some of us are still looking for jobs or looking for internships. I mean, in the case of second year, still looking for jobs and on OPT. So it's going to be, you have to come prepared for that. You are going to give your best. You're going to work hard, and nothing is going to be given to you on a plate. So this is something that you have to keep in mind. Be prepared and have your expectations set. And the second thing is, the challenge itself for international students is two times, or I wouldn't say two times, but much more in finding a job than domestics. And I'll tell you why. Because uh, domestic students come with an advantage because they don't have to really look for companies that will sponsor them. So international students will have to keep that in mind. And I also think that domestic students come more prepared, in the sense that even in their undergrad, they knew how to network, they knew how to reach out to companies. And that's something that you wouldn't anticipate would come that naturally to you. When you look at them, you learn a lot, you pick up a lot of things. And so that's the second thing, right? So we are told at Kelley that you will get a job no matter what, just persist at it. But um, in the sense, it just takes more effort than an average domestic student would take, but then you would eventually get a job. So coming to my own experience, Kelley does have a lot of schools coming to campus, like other schools, but they are not the only schools that people end up going to for jobs. There are a whole lot of other companies that people also go to, especially international students who are looking for tech jobs, right? So Deloitte had come to school for interviewing for internships as well as full-time jobs, and I interviewed, and I made it through the internship. I got selected for the internship, and I did my internship over the summer at Deloitte and converted it to a full time job. So, and I had to weigh my options of whether I wanted to recruit again, get a job in another company, or stick with Deloitte. And I chose to stick with Deloitte because it opened up a lot of things for me. That meant my whole second year was free for me. So I chose that. And because of that, I could go study abroad from here. That is, I could go to Italy. I could study there for some time in the final semester. I also could work on a whole lot of hands-on projects. I mean, the others were also doing it, but then it had a lot of, I had a more mental space, is what I would say. That was how it was. Do you
I
want me
can
to
imagine,
continue?
right? So congratulations on that, on Deloitte. And I think what you're saying is, a lot of times, the whole thing about an MBA is there is a part that is the experience, and then there is a part which is the other things, the getting the job and the ROI and the visa and all of it. So I think right now, there are there are two parts to it. So one part to it is, your thoughts on this whole. So first we had the H1B visa, getting cancelled. Now we had the F1 visa being cancelled and then being revoked. So and then you have the whole coronavirus happening. The economy seems to be a little bit dicey. Trump, I really don't know whether I should believe what I read, but November, what is going to happen, whether he gets re-elected. So there are these news. So imagine that you're, a student, right? I mean, most of the people who are listening and most of the people watching this would possibly be people who are thinking there is a lot of chaos, right? So I have some thoughts on it, but before that, I just wanted to get your thought. Is there anything that you would advise or anything that you think will give a better framework to navigate through this?
Okay, a framework.
Otherwise, I don't want to put you on a spot and ask a complex question. So let me just give my thoughts on this. So I think my thoughts on this have been that, so you mentioned something interesting about the job market in the US, and this is something that I think people, and this is my experience. I have lived at some point in the US, so I get a sense of what it takes to work. Um, if people ask me why US as a destination, I have three reasons for it. I have three reasons for most things in life, but specifically for this one. So the first reason that I have for why US and why I usually suggest is, a culturally, right? It's an English speaking country. It's culturally, you will understand what it is as opposed to, let's say, working in Germany or working in some other country. I think culturally, US is the closest you can get to being in India. And I'm pretty sure places like New Jersey and West Coast, if you go, I was in Sunnyvale at some point, and it's just that there is this certain bonhomie, and you feel more at home, though it's the US, right? So I think culturally, that was one of the reasons that I usually suggest people. The second reason that I usually advise is, you know, US is, according to me, one of the most, I mean, it's not one of the most, at least from my knowledge, the most meritocratic, culture. If you are able to do well, and we have seen examples of Sundar Pichai or, Satya Nadella, but the point is, those are just two examples, but there are so many other people who have flourished in the US system, and nobody has really said, well, you come from a different country, so you cannot succeed. So I think that's a huge plus point. And the third plus point is just the economy, right? See, people talk about Canada. People say, oh, well, it's easier. Let me go to Canada. And I think sometimes sitting in India, you look at the map of Canada and you look at the map of US and you think, well, you know what? Both of them are. And anybody who's been to Canada and the US will know that the US economy, just the number of jobs available, the number of startups, the number of companies, the number of recruiters, right, is so high that any given day, Canadian economy is probably one, I don't know, hundredth of, let's say, the US economy in terms of the number of jobs. So this is usually what I advise students of why we should be applying. So I think the first two reasons remain the same. I don't think, irrespective of Trump being there or what the economy is, I think the first two. But what is your thought of the third part, which is, this whole visa fluctuation, with F1, H1? So if you can just explain, maybe also because people may not know how it works. So if you can just explain and, yeah,
Sure.
OPT
I'll
and
just,
then.
yeah. Before we talk about how it is now, I'll explain how you go from you go on a F1 visa and then you go to a CPT, then you go to OPT and then to H1B, right? CPT is nothing but while you're
You
a
can just
student.
explain the flow so that students, because many of them don't know the verbs also, they have heard of it, but
Okay.
they may not be very clear on, yeah, what is CPT or OPT.
Okay, sure. So you go on your F1 visa when you enter the US, and that you have something called the I-20, which your school gives you. And when you come to immigration, that's what you present, and that's how you enter the US, right? And this I-20 keeps changing every time you come. Like every time you have to come out of the US, you have to get a new I-20 depending on the last time you got it. And that's what F1 means at this point. But then when you're transitioning from your first year to your second year and you choose to do an internship, you need something called a work permit, which is called the CPT. And it's what happens is it is not, it can be done only as a, you're not completely, I'm so sorry, you're still a student, so it's not like a work permit as such, but it's something that will help you do your internship, and it is valid only for your internship. You can't do anything else with it. So that CPT is given by your school. It's not given by the government of the US, and it's only valid for the, let's say, 2 to 2.5 months that you do your internship. So having said that, the OPT comes into play after your second year when you want to do your job. And the OPT is not tied to your job. You just get a work permit. As a student on F1 visa, an OPT is your work permit to work anywhere in your field of study. And this one is given by the government of the US. You apply directly to the government and they issue it to you. And right now I'm on OPT. And while you are on OPT, you get to stay unemployed for 90 days. Whether you do it cumulatively or you distribute it between jobs is up to you, but then it all adds up. And you have 90 days where you can stay without a job. While on OPT, it's not tied to your job. So you can work in different companies, you can move from companies to companies, you can work at more than one job too, but then there's always a catch there. You have to make sure that both of them are in your field of study. So right now, let's say I've not started working with Deloitte yet. That's another, I'll talk about it later. I'm on OPT and my time has started ticking. So I have like completed 2 weeks of unemployment already. And once I start working, that'll just like, stop there. But then in the interim, if I choose to work with, let's say, a startup, just to like get some experience till I start working with Deloitte, it shouldn't be a problem at all. And now this is the OPT. And now parallelly, what is also happening for me here is that Deloitte is going to sponsor my H1B. And because I had completed my credits earlier on, they actually applied for my H1B this year itself. And what is happening is, so luckily for me, it got picked and it's in the process of getting approved. So once it approves, let's say come October and it gets approved, so what happens is my OPT status would shift to H1B, and then I would legally become a H1. I would legally move to H1 visa, and it would be a. I would no longer be on F1 visa. Let's say I would no longer be on a student visa, which would have been valid for another 3 years for me. But then the next time I go to India, I would have to get it stamped and come back, and then I would officially be, as a H1 resident here. So that's how it goes.
So
And
just to
coming to,
paraphrase that part, just to paraphrase, when you're in India, you apply for an F1. This is when you go to the US consulate. They look at your I-20, they look at all the documents, they look at where you're going, and then they stamp your F1. Once you land there, you're on an F1 visa as long as you're in college. During internship, while you're still in college, you have a CPT, which is the practical training thing. And when you actually graduate from your thing, basically you're on OPT, and you have to make sure that in this OPT you don't have more than 90 days of unemployment, right? And during this OPT, it's your job to figure out an employer who can file your H1B. And in your case, Deloitte ended up filing for the H1B, right? And once the OPT gets over, you roll over into H1. Excellent. Great. I just wanted to paraphrase too. Yeah.
one more thing, right? OPT, if it is a traditional Okay, generally for an MBA, OPT is only for 1 year because usually it's not STEM certified. But more and more schools are getting OPTs, getting their MBA programs STEM certified. Kelley being the latest. Just when we
Right.
were about to graduate, we got our STEM certification. So luckily for us, we have 3 years. What this means is the first, usually when you have your OPT for 1 year, you have a chance of getting your H1B picked once or maximum twice, depending on how your school gives your credits. And if you don't get picked in both the times, you have to exit the country in the current scenario because of the way Trump has changed it, right? If you will know by April whether your H1 has been picked or not, and if it has not been picked, you can't even wait till October till you exit the country. So this additional 2 years of OPT means that you get two more chances to file for an H1 and wait for it to be picked. So I think that has worked out a lot in favor for MBA students, especially once schools have, applied for STEM certification.
So,
That's
sorry, just wanted to kind of this for the students. So, STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. Many people think it's management, it's mathematics, not management. And if you have a specialization in any of these four, you end up having a 2 year extension to your OPT, which essentially takes it to a 3 year OPT. So, the moment you graduate, from that time, you have 3 years by which you need to figure out the employer who's going to file your H1B, right?
correct.
And
Uh,
more and more schools today are providing extra courses in science and technology to get their MBA turned into a STEM MBA. I've heard many schools, especially where they want to get a diverse international pool, be more conscious of that, right? So, yeah.
So to give you an example, at Kelley, I double majored in marketing and management. Now, because I majored in marketing and it requires a lot of analytics, marketing is deemed as a STEM course at Kelley. And there are like 5 of them, including marketing. There are business analytics, marketing, supply chain, and a few others that come on. If you major in those, you get a STEM degree. So you can choose to do. That's how it is in my school. It could be different in other schools.
And I'm just kind of looping back to this. If you were to give any advice to people looking at it, I think we have discussed how it works. What would be your any kind of pointers on that part? What would you be telling people looking at applying to US this year in terms of your thing? Like, is the whole experience worth it? What you make out of life, because sometimes I think people tend to be slightly myopic, tend to look at it from a lens of now, which is 1-2 years after they graduate. But if you were to look at it as a larger kind of thing, what's been your experience, and what would be your this, especially given the turmoil that is happening right now with the F1 and the F1.
So, I mean, we always talk about risks, we talk about rewards, and then we talk about, let's say, the larger picture, right? Obviously, the risk, and especially now, is not only the coronavirus uh, pandemic, but also the fluctuating immigration scene here in the US, and also obviously the economy. And see, if you just remove the coronavirus thing from the scene, it was always going to be iffy with Trump at the helm. Even back in 2018 when I came to the US, and I came having that in mind, saying, okay, it could go anyway if I don't get. And at that time, I didn't even have the 2 year extension for OPT, so I knew that I had just like 1 or 2 chances at getting a H1B, and I had to work for it. So that is the risk that I took, definitely. So, but having said that, like I already mentioned, a lot of schools are working to give international students more chances at H1B also by getting STEM certification. So you have to keep both in mind. I would say try to see if the schools that you're applying to already are STEM certified. You get to know if they are or not only on their website but also in blogs like Poets and Quants, right? Just look for that. Um, the other thing about the economy, what would you think is happening to the US economy now? You hear so many news reports saying that people are losing jobs. I, for one, know some of my second years and previous year students who have lost their jobs during this pandemic. And what are they doing? And especially if they are international students, they have been working hard at reaching out to their networks to get to another job at some company, and that sponsors. And I think that, and I've seen how the community reaches out to help them as well. And I also see on LinkedIn a lot of new jobs being posted, whether it's in the tech industry or marketing jobs or name it. And it's not always the Amazons and Googles of the world, right? There are other tech companies if you're interested in tech, and there are other big companies if you're interested in other areas that do have roles that would be suitable for you, I would say. But then also you have to question yourself, like I mentioned, would you be able to work there at least in the short term, and then move to other jobs that you really want later on? Because that's a bet that you will have to make. Um so these are the things that you have to keep in mind. But then when you think about the rewards, and the other risk that you're also taking is your opportunity cost. I mean, you're spending a lot of money to get an education here. You're losing 2 years of your time. You're losing all the salary that you would have made, let's say, back in India at a good job. But what are the rewards that you're getting, right? Trust me, you would get a job that is going to make up both in terms of salary, and in terms of experience once you graduate. You would have also made like for me personally, I think the biggest gain that I made was in terms of the network, the the friendships that I made, the people I have met, the exposure at the international level. I went to not just, I mean, I studied not just in the US, but because of the student exchange program, I went to Europe, met students there, interacted with them. I went to Guatemala to work on a client project. So I did a lot of hands on learning. So at school, you also get a lot of hands on learning because I worked for a tire company, I worked for a microfinance company in Guatemala. I worked, and you just name it, you have so many case competitions that you actually work on real cases for companies. So the amount of experience you get at this level is going to be worth it. And then to a certain extent, I also feel that MBA and the learnings you get here are very internalized. And then they come across at a later stage for sure. For example, at Kelley, we have something called the leadership track. And then you are taught a lot of personal leadership courses, you're taught a lot of org behavior, organizational behavior, and leadership courses. And how does it, so you read this, you sit in class, you participate, and then you start thinking, right? So where is it going to show up? It's not going to show up immediately when you start as a assistant manager or a senior consultant. But then once you start leading teams, I think that's when it really helps you go up the career ladder, and it would be really useful. I think long term, if you think about it, that's how it really helps you out.
Right. Great points on that, Keerthana. In fact, this is something that I usually, tell my students that there are really, again, as you realize, I have three things. So three things why an MBA also makes sense is, in terms of a lot of people just wanted to know on the chat, you can probably let me know. Uh, you probably are from technology, you're probably from, let's say, manufacturing or operations, or you're from finance. You will tend to meet people within your field. You tend to be, in that sense, very unidimensional. So I like to, think of an MBA like a, Rajasthani or a Gujarati thali, right? Where they give you a bunch of so many things to eat, and you can just take a little bit of everything, and then in the second year you can, depending on what you liked, you pick more of it. So there is this all-round knowledge that you get, which I think is something that MBAs are designed. The second thing that MBAs are designed for is really to do this, in fact, one of the things that, most people, and this is something that you also mentioned, is the kind of opportunities and the kind of people that you work with. What it really does is it creates a version 2.0 of yourself, correct? So if
Yeah.
I had gotten that opportunity without an MBA, maybe, but could I have leveraged it? Could I have maximized it? Could I have, increased my own capacity to do that work? Perhaps not. Especially when you look at the kind of international cultural things, when you are in a team where you're surrounded by people from, different countries and functions. And I think the third thing which you mentioned, which is, on LinkedIn, right? When you go, I think the alumni factor matters a lot. So lot of people, and I've had someone tell me about this, which said, Arun, the reason I'm trying to help my juniors is if they do well, the school does well, and I do well, right? It's a brand. It's a everybody is partaking in that brand, correct? So I
And
think that kind of, yeah.
yes.
So I think that's one of the larger things, and I think from students' perspective, if and I know that when you walked into this whole MBA, just to give a time kind of thing, so you would have been applying in 2018, correct? So you applied in 2018, you landed there in 2019, and now it's 2020, correct?
So I landed there in July 2018 because I
Correct.
applied
So, yeah,
2017 to it.
right. So 2017, the world was a very different place. You had no idea that sitting in 2020, world would be like this, COVID would be there. So I think for students who are right now looking at it, they would actually enter in 2021 because they are applying this year, which means they get to graduate in 2023, right? And the hope is number one, very simply put, the moment you find a vaccine, moment the world order comes back, the pent up demand is not going to go anywhere. Correct. So we are hoping that things bounce back. Hopefully by 2023, which is when, or 22, which is when most of these guys would be looking at internship or jobs. So I think that also would play a role in kind of what's your.
Oh yeah, for sure. It is all. Of course, it's not bouncing back at the rate that it should.
Right.
It would have at this point, but jobs are still there. There are, if you make enough effort, I'm sure anybody can get a job. But then it's only going to get better. And let's say in 2021, it is. Let's hope we find a vaccine and schools open up and everything. Even now, even Kelley is doing a hybrid model where they have online and in person classes, so the experience is definitely going to come back much better. Schools would also have figured out how to attract more students by then. uh, and for those students who are going to come to the US in 2021, I think it's going to be much better, because for me, I think an MBA experience is even more better in person, because whether it comes to class discussions, whether it comes to peer interactions, the club events, the n number of parties that you have as an MBA student, or anything, everything will add as a real good experience in getting to know your professors, to your students. And I think that's one big plus for those people who are applying in 2021 compared to those who are going to start studying in 2020. And I think that's that's one big factor maybe that they're all missing out on, at least for one semester.
Right. And from what I've been hearing, so we have got a bunch of students who have gone to B school. Uh, Most of them seem to be opting for a deferral. So a lot of students saying, let me go for a deferral, let me, wait it out. Because as you correctly pointed out, I think the experience of sitting in a class and, having people around you is something that is irreplaceable. In fact, the way I see it is, let's assume 2021 is when the vaccine comes out. The whole idea would be that next year, anyone who wants to travel to the US, anyone who wants an F1 visa needs to be vaccinated to begin with, right? So they would be vaccinated only when they would be able to travel. So I think the situation will change by 2021. 2020 batch, I think, is going to be one of those isolated batches where not just it's online, but they're going to miss out a lot on the diversity factor, because international students, not just India, but even China and other countries would not be able to join them this year. So, Keerthana, very interesting. And what I just wanted to do was, at this point, just go. There are a couple of people who have asked some questions, so we could probably take a couple of questions and, go through it. So I'm going to take the first question, which is with regards to, so some of them I'll be just try to quickly answer because they are based on, specific questions. But there is one question which is it difficult to find a job in brand management? Okay. Now, I don't want to get into specifically brand management, but in your experience, right, what has been your this when employers come, what kind of jobs really take the H1? Is it consulting, tech jobs, or other industries also open, including brand management?
That's a very, very good question, right? When companies come, let's say on campus and recruit, most companies, and this is a, don't quote me on this, but then most companies look for that recruit international students are either in consulting or in product management or in B2B marketing. And when I say B2, what happens, and I'll tell you why. When it comes to B2C marketing, when you're looking at, let's say, getting into the FMCG sector as in India or CPG sector here in the US, what happens is they usually go for uh, domestic students that know the products culturally and they know how to market culturally to a US audience. And most of the companies that come for such roles in that sector, in that industry, do not, they outright tell us that they're not sponsored, they're not going to recruit international students or sponsor for those roles. So that is completely off. I didn't personally, I didn't even apply because what is the point? They have told us already. That's one thing that happens that I've seen happening at Kelley for sure. But yeah, the other roles are all open.
So we have to be conscious that if you're trying to, so I remember someone applied to HEC Paris at some point, and this was a candidate that I was working with, and she really wanted to put brand management. And my point to her was, you as an Indian, right, or any other culture, you cannot go and sell beauty products to French women, right? We just don't get it culturally, right? It's a lot of nuance that is entrenched in the language, and a lot of other things that I think brand management or something of that requires. But what you said makes sense, which is anything where there is a, you're culturally neutral. In fact, I would say if there is a company that is looking at marketing to an emerging economy like India, I think you then become a very strong candidate for such jobs also, right?
Correct. One such company also told the international students you cannot apply for the job in the US, but then if you want to go back to India and work in the same role, we would be more than happy to do that for you, or any other country, right? So yes, like you said, if it is an emerging economy, if it is outside the US, the same product that they want to cater to a different culture or an audience, there are opportunities as well. And I have one of my friends who decided to come back to India and work there. And such opportunities are open for him. So
Right. So the other question that I had, which was with regards to this, so many people are asking about various this, but there is one question from Rajat around business analytics, and you mentioned this about taking specializations and making it a STEM MBA. Would you suggest, and this is something that I've been suggesting to students as well, which is you can always look for a master's in business analytics or a master's in a specific area. So what is your take on the kind of jobs for, let's say, an MBA versus someone who's pursuing a master's in a particular topic, let's say business analytics?
let me talk about consulting, right? Because I'm in consulting. Uh, at Kelley, you also have the MSIS program where people master information systems, and I'm doing an MBA. And both of us, people who are doing MSIS also go to Deloitte. People who are doing their MBA also go to Deloitte. Now, where we had a cohort where they were also interning with us. But then when you convert your internship and you start at a job, MBAs start much higher, or at least one level higher with a higher salary in the same role. So that's one thing that sets, I mean, at least in consulting that I've seen, that differs the MBAs because of the all-round exposure that you get. The MBA program in the first semester gives you a solid base, a solid foundation on all aspects of running a business. It's just the introductory phase of it, but then you get introduced to marketing, you get introduced to finance, operations, name it. So all of this, and I think that gives a solid foundation for figuring out what you want to major in later on. So that's what I mentioned, is that you start a little higher And also, I think what MBAs usually go for, or what MBAs are usually recruited for, are managerial roles versus, let's say, specialized roles like business, and let's say a lead business analyst or whatever. So it could be, in consulting, you could be either a tech strategy consultant, or you could be a supply chain consultant. But what that means is you're not going to be in the nitty gritty of things. You're not going to be coding, or you're not going to be working directly with those people. You're going to be working at a level where you're directly interacting with clients. So that's the experiential difference that you would also get. Having said that, the MSIS students who worked at Kelley are also directly interacting with the clients. They just start a little
Right.
lower.
Right. Great point on that. And just wanted to kind of let people know that I know you have a lot of questions for us, and we have another 10 minutes or so. So we'll be taking a few more questions. What you can do is you can, so Rachel will be sharing on the chat window. She will be sharing a link. So in case you have any questions about applying to US, about the whole thing, please reach out to us. We are more than glad to sit down, have a chat with you, look at your specific profile, because I'm getting questions where people, I'm just sharing it with Keerthana and the others, that I have 0 years experience. I have had someone, will I get a job, right? And then someone saying, I have like a lot of experience, will I get a job? So instead of me answering that question, why don't I answer the question about this? That so first of all, this is for the people, whether you have less or more experience, you need to show to an employer, you need to be able to show to the B school that you are worth it. See, nobody is scared. So the example that I usually give is, do you ever tell people how many years experience you are walking? Perhaps not, right? Because once you learned walking, I don't know, at the age of 5 or 6, right? When you learned walking, more years of walking did not make you special. So if you have 10 years experience or 5 years experience or 2 years experience, what schools are really looking at is the quality of those experience. Having said that, now, question to you, Keerthana, is at Indiana, what has been your experience? What was the diversity in terms of people coming in terms of experience level?
Sure. So in terms of diversity, both international students and domestic students, I think the youngest student was 23 or 24 years when he or she came to the class, and the oldest student was about 40. So you can see the range of experience across the board. The median age was 28, 29. So most of us had 5 to 6 years of experience. And like Arun already mentioned, I don't think it is a matter of the number of years of experience that you have, but how you can present yourself. And one thing that someone who has a lot of experience, let's say, has to think about is, what does he want with an MBA? Is he looking, or is he or she looking to get into a new industry, get into a new function, or get into a new industry and function? And then if you think about it like this, I think, for me at least, or it helps you analyze where you want to go and how you want to use your MBA and how you want to tell your story, so that a company that you're applying to post MBA sees you fit for that role. So how do you convince your school and then the company that you apply later on that your journey was correct for this, So
And,
it's a
uh,
matter of
and
how you present.
sorry?
No, I'm saying it is all a matter of how you present your story.
Right, right. I think one of the things that we usually tell students, and a lot of them right now might be fixated just on the GMAT, but many times what happens is once GMAT gets done, they look at the question and says, oh my God, no, I had not expected that I have to now talk about everything. But I think somewhere having the clarity, and this is something that I've heard from a lot of students, we are also kind of corroborating that, which is, having a clarity of what you want to do to a large extent will help you stay the course. Otherwise, MBA can be an overwhelming experience. I've had students who have gone there and said, Arun, the world is my oyster and I'll go explore things. And 6 months later, they are like fatigued because just the amount of opportunities available, the number of networking events, going and meeting people, participating, and most people they are full of enthusiasm and the pressure that, hey, this is 2 years of my life. I need to make sure I get the my bang for my buck, so to speak. And every opportunity they put up their hand and say yes, 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 yes. And after like a few months, they realize, no, maybe it's better for me to say no and really pick what I want to do. And I think that's where the experience level also makes a kind of a great point on that. I have one more question, which is again an interesting question. See, I think a lot of people, and when I speak to them, they say, Arun, one of the reasons for me to do an MBA is to be an entrepreneur. And you've been an entrepreneur in food tech. And so, how do you think that play works? So, one of the biggest issues that I see, and this is usually what I tell students, is that the challenge to entrepreneurship is basically staying poor, right? Not having a lot of encumbrance so that you can pursue it for, let's say, 6 months, 1 year. Uh, but with an education loan on head, where you have to repay. So how do you see that playing out? Like, when do you think people in your batch or seniors, when do you think they see this entrepreneurship game coming? Or if you have thought of it?
Okay, having done entrepreneurship before my MBA, I can just tell you a small, or the approach in which each of them is done, right? Like you mentioned already, I think when you think of a startup or you want to do your own business, you think of it as a hustle. You want to give everything and you want to make it stand on its own in the shortest time possible so that you can grow it. So that hustle is a core part of a startup, at least in the first 1 or 2 years till you grow it. And then when you think of a corporate job, it is already, it's like you go into an established, usually you go into an established institution where you're part of the system, you figure out and you grow eventually, and then there's a less lot that you have to, let's say, worry about in terms of the business itself. Now if I, let's say, people in my batch, if they are we have had a few people who are contemplating entrepreneurship, and I think what it boils down to, especially if you have a loan, is that it will, I think I've seen a lot of people postponing it and at least telling us that they would consider it but not anytime in the near future, because they have to first get the loans done, and then once they have a little bit of savings, they would leap into it. But that's my experience. I'm sure this is also across the board, and how much risk taking capacity you have, that makes the decision for you on when you want to start up in spite of having a loan.
Correct. Very true. That's the risk taking. So I think that's I just have one last thing, because I just saw a couple of people asking on that. But on that note, I just wanted to add that over the years, when I've seen people who have pursued, and this might also be from a 30,000 feet overview when you look at it from a larger perspective. Um, I asked this question once to a student who was getting into a top school, and he had a huge loan, and he said, well, I'm going to go there. And I asked him, I said, so how do you see this risk? And there's a very interesting analogy. He said, Arun, the way I'm looking at it is, I'm looking at it as, let's say I'm building my house, correct? So if I'm building my house, if I'm let's say buying a house, then if I'm going to look at a quick, like flip it and make a quick buck out of it in the next couple of years and exit the market, and maybe it may not make sense. But what he said made sense, which is, he said, look, I am looking at investing in myself, right? For a career that is going to last for the next 20, 30. He was 27, 28. So he said, maybe for the next 30 years of my life, I'm going to work. So the advantage of an MBA, right, may not be felt so much immediately after, but at 45, when you are going to, go for that CTO role, maybe someone in your company is, in that company is an RMN who can refer, or, at the net work is really your net worth after you kind of go after a few years. So I think looking at it from a larger 15, 20 year timeline, MBA looks justifiable, and this is something that I would give as an advice and make people think about it, that think of it as a home loan. When you take a home loan, you build a house for 70 lakhs or 80 lakhs or whatever that number is, right? We are not hoping that I'll get that house and tomorrow I'll sell that house and make a profit. You are hoping that if it's there and maybe over the next 10, 15 years, I get to stay. So here the MBA degree is with you. So you have all these opportunities, but over and above, you also have the longer term capital gains, right, from the underlying asset. So the last question that I think people had on this point was this OPT and this whole H1B. So let us assume that I graduate and I have a OPT with me, and I'm not able to find a job. What are the chances of me not so two points over here. Me not finding a job and me actually having that 90 days expire on my OPT. What is the probability? What are the chances of that? Number two, what percentage? What is the conversion percentage of people who go from OPT, the employers who are converting the OPT to H1? So two-part question on that.
Sure. Before I answer this, I think the answer that you gave for the previous question is really good, and especially if you think of building a business long term. I was only thinking of this versus this, but then if you think of how your MBA would help you build a business, I think in MBA you're introduced to a lot of organizational thinking and how you can build a company. What is the culture that how the culture that goes into a company, and then the different functions and how you can set it up, and that is something that you will use a lot when you build a company. And even now I think, had I done my MBA and then started my food tech startup, how different would it have been, right? I would have done a lot of things much more differently because I would have had that knowledge. I would have understood a lot more things much better. But yeah, moving on to this question, OPT and what are the chances of someone finishing up their 90 days of unemployment, and then what happens? There is definitely a chance of that. There are a few people in my previous batch who unfortunately couldn't get a job in that, Indians who couldn't get a job in that period and had to go back to India and search for jobs there. It happens, but there are not too many of them. Let's say just one or two people that I know of, and the rest, everyone else is here. What other options do people have if they do not get a full-time job here? What they can do, in whether it is OPT or whether their H1B is not paid, right? They can do contracts jobs. And when I say contract, these are legal valid jobs that you can take up, let's say for 3 to 4 months at a company that is willing to do your OPT file, the documentation required for OPT. So there are options out there, but then if everything else fails, there are a few outliers that do go back to their home countries, and it happens, but pretty rare. And then the second question was, sorry, what was the second
conversion
question?
rate from OPT to H1B? Like, what is the chances for the company to file your H1B?
Sure. So one thing that I was told, or is usually heard in most companies that take you as an intern, right? And especially if they are companies that sponsor, they say that for every intern that we take, usually there is a full-time job that is waiting, and it is up to you. If you perform well, usually you get the job. uh, Out of the 6 people that, both domestic and international, that went to Deloitte this year, 5 of us made it to full-time. So usually all of us make it, and it is not that they pick the best. They have a job waiting for everyone, usually in all the companies that take you, because they invest so much in you. They help you grow there during your internship. They do a whole lot of things for you, and they want you to succeed. So usually it is that. But having said that, it goes both ways, right? Companies choose not to take students that do not perform well in internship, and students also choose not to go to companies that they're not satisfied with. And I've seen both happen. And the in my current batch, including the domestic students, it's right now it's at 50%, where all the students who did their internships at a company went back to the same company for full time. Now, coming to international students, there were a few companies that told international students when they applied for internships that they could only do the internship and they could not do the full time job at the same company because they were not going to sponsor. Now, you have to understand that at the OPT level, companies do not sponsor. They just give you a job, and you have a work permit. So you could encounter such cases also. And what happens, one or two of my friends who had that situation went ahead, did the internship, because they always knew they had one whole year to recruit again. So yeah, so it was about 50%, both domestic and international.
I think you make a pertinent point that at the end of the day there is also this value. See, when you look at numbers, there is also a value of who you are, right? So I think sometimes it's just important for us to back ourselves and have that confidence that if 50% cases is succeeding, I'm going to be in that 50%, right? So I've had a very interesting quote that one of my students. So he actually graduated from Ross and he got placed in Facebook. And because of this whole H1B issues, Facebook decided to hire him in their London office, right? And from London, they said, you go. So I think, the one interesting thing he said is if a company really wants to hire you, they will figure out a way. So they will figure out a way to kind of keep you that. So that was this thing. So I think, Keerthana, we got great points that we discussed, and just to kind of this, you went in, you had a scholarship of $50,000, excellent, but you still took a non-collateral loan. This is again for people, so you don't need to go back to your parents after all these years and ask them to mortgage their house. I think a lot of us tend to have this sense of pride, like when you work for 4 or 5 years, like maa baap se paise nahi lunga, main khud karunga, right? So there are opportunities for you to take a non-collateral loan. And once you go to the US, what you shared, which is a lot of it is about networking, about figuring out what are the kind of companies that are available. Maybe the natives may have an advantage, but we need to be quick to learn that. Great advice that you had of the STEM MBA. Maybe you should check for the MBA program if they are offering a STEM so that you get the 3-year OPT. So I think there was a bunch of fantastic points that were discussed, and thanks so much, Keerthana. I think we kind of at the end of 1 hour, and it was a great discussion. And I just want to thank you for your time, and thank you all of you who joined us today for this session. The idea is at CrackVerbal, one of the things that we are also trying to see is we are trying to see if we can get students like Keerthana who can come and share their experience of being in the US right now so that they can speak from the trenches of what is happening out there. So please make sure that you look out for other such webinars that we're going to be having in the future. So thanks a lot. Once again, thanks, Keerthana, for your time.
No, thank you so much for inviting me again. And I would like to say all the best to all of you. I really hope you come here and then figure out what you want to do and succeed at it.
Wonderful. Thank you, and have a great, safe rest of the weekend, actually. It's already started in India, so it's Friday, 8:30. So I will let everyone go. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.